They said she was too fragile for the frontier. They said she was property, a bargaining chip in a land deal written in blood. But history often forgets what happens when a caged bird meets a wolf who knows how to bite. In the autumn of 1881, amidst the lawless canyons of the Arizona Territory, a shy, terrified virgin named Clara O'Malley didn't just disappear. She was taken into the spirit world by an outlaw raised by the Apache. What happened next wasn't a kidnapping. It was a transformation. Tonight we uncover the true, untold story of the sacred ritual at Black Mesa and how a girl promised to a devil gave her soul to a savage under the stars. This is the legend of Silas Kincaid and his forever mate. The date was October 14th, 1881. The air in the dusty town of Bisbee, Arizona, tasted of sulfur and impending rain. Inside the stifling parlor of the O'Malley Ranch, 18-year-old Clara O'Malley stood frozen, her hands trembling so violently that the porcelain teacup rattled against its saucer. She was the picture of innocence. Golden hair pulled back in a severe, tight bun, her dress buttoned to her chin. She was known in town as the White Lily, a girl who rarely spoke above a whisper and who had never looked a man in the eye. Sitting across from her, occupying the leather armchair like a toad on a lily pad, was Bo Hatcher. Hatcher was the wealthiest cattle baron in Cochise County. He was 45, with a face scarred by smallpox and eyes that looked like two chips of flint. He didn't look at Clara with love. He looked at her the way a butcher looks at a prize heifer. "The wedding will be Saturday," Hatcher said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He didn't ask. He stated, "I've already paid off your father's gambling debts at the Birdcage Theater. The deed to this ranch transfers to me the moment the vows are said." Clara's father, Tobias O'Malley, a weak-chinned man who smelled of cheap whiskey and fear, nodded vigorously from the corner. "It's a good match, Clara. Mr. Hatcher is a generous man. He's saving us." I cannot," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. Hatcher stood up. The sound of his spurs scraping the hardwood floor made Clara flinch. He walked over to her, looming over her small frame. He reached out a gloved hand and gripped her chin, forcing her to look up. The leather of his glove smelled of horse sweat and gunpowder. "You are a virgin, aren't you, girl?" Hatcher sneered. "That's what I paid for. Unspoiled goods. Don't think for a second you have a choice. You'll be in my bed Saturday night, or your father will be in a pine box by Sunday morning." He released her with a shove. "Get her ready, Tobias. If she runs, I have men watching the roads. Even the Apaches don't cross Bo Hatcher." As Hatcher stormed out, the heavy oak door slammed, shaking the portraits on the walls. Clara sank to her knees, gasping for air. Her life was over. She was to be sold, like livestock, to a man known for beating his horses and his women. But fate, it seemed, had a different player on the board. Outside, in the deepening shadows of the porch, a figure watched. He leaned against a support beam, hidden by the gloom. He wore a long, dusty duster coat, and a low-brimmed Stetson shadowed his eyes. He was Silas Kincaid. Silas was a ghost story in Bisbee. Rumor had it he was stolen by the Chiricahua Apache as a child and raised by a medicine man before returning to the white world as a bounty hunter. They called him Shaz Dijiji, the black bear, because of his size and his silence. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt, his steel blue eyes narrowing as he watched Hatcher ride away. "Saturday," Silas muttered to himself. "That gives me 2 days to steal the bride." The night before the wedding, the sky broke open. Rain lashed against the dry earth, turning the streets of Bisbee into rivers of mud. Thunder rolled across the Dragoon Mountains like artillery fire. Clara sat in her bedroom, staring at the wedding dress hanging on the wardrobe. It looked like a shroud. She had a small knife hidden in her boot, a paring knife she'd stolen from the kitchen. She told herself she would use it on Hatcher, or perhaps herself, before she let him touch her. Suddenly, her window latch clicked. Clara gasped, backing against the wall, reaching for the knife. The window slid upward with a groan. A pair of wet, black boots swung over the sill, followed by the towering form of Silas Kincaid. He was terrifying. He filled the small room, smelling of rain, wet wool, and sagebrush. A long scar ran down his left cheek, disappearing into a dark, heavy beard. He carried a Winchester rifle slung over his back and a Bowie knife strapped to his thigh. "Scream, and we both die," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, contrasting sharply with the chaotic storm outside. Who are you?" Clara stammered, the knife shaking in her hand. Silas looked at the pathetic little blade, and then up to her wide, terrified eyes. He didn't laugh. He looked sad. "I'm the man your mother wrote to before she died," Silas said, pulling a tattered, water-stained envelope from inside his coat. Clara's heart stopped. Her mother had passed 3 years ago from fever. "My mother." "She knew your father was a weak fool," Silas said bluntly. "She knew a day like this would come. She sent me $500, her life savings, to take you to her sister in Santa Fe if things got bad. I'd say marrying Bo Hatcher is about as bad as it gets." He stepped closer, water dripping from his hat onto the floorboards. "Hatcher has 3 men guarding the front, 2 at the back, but they're cowboys, not warriors. They're hiding from the rain in the barn." "I can't go," Clara wept, tears mixing with her terror. "He'll kill my father." "Hatcher needs your father alive to sign the deed over legally," Silas corrected. "Once you're gone, the deal is void. Your father will be safe enough, just poor. Now, Miss O'Malley, you have a choice. You can stay here and be Hatcher's property, or you can trust a man the town calls a savage and ride into the storm." Clara looked at the wedding dress, then at the rugged, dangerous man offering her a hand. His hand was large, calloused, and rough, but he held it out with a strange, solemn reverence. She dropped the paring knife. She took his hand. "Take me," she whispered. Silas nodded once. "Stay close. Move when I move. Breathe when I breathe." They slipped out the window into the deluge. The mud sucked at Clara's thin shoes. Silas moved with uncanny silence, his feet making no sound despite his size. He led her not to the road, but toward the dense chaparral behind the house. As they reached the tree line, a shout erupted from the barn. "Hey! Who's that?" A gunshot cracked, the bullet whizzing past Clara's ear. She screamed. Silas spun around, leveling his Winchester in a blur of motion. Bang! Bang! 2 shots, 2 lanterns on the barn porch shattered, plunging the guards into darkness. "Run!" Silas roared, scooping Clara up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He sprinted toward the tree line, where 2 horses were tethered, a massive black stallion and a smaller mare. He threw her onto the mare. "Hold on tight and don't let go of the mane." They galloped into the darkness, the rain stinging their faces, leaving the shouting and the chaos of the O'Malley Ranch behind. They were riding straight into the hostile territory of the Dragoons, with nothing but the lightning to light their way. They rode for 6 hours without stopping. Clara's thighs burned. Her hands were raw from gripping the reins, and she was soaked to the bone. She was exhausted, terrified, and freezing. Finally, as dawn began to bleed gray light over the horizon, Silas slowed the horses. They were deep in a canyon, surrounded by towering red rock walls that blocked the wind. "We stop here," Silas said, dismounting. He walked over to Clara. She tried to dismount, but her legs collapsed. Silas caught her against his chest. For the first time, she felt the heat of him. He was solid rock, warm and hard. He held her upright until she found her footing, but he didn't pull away immediately. "You ride good for a ranch girl," he grunted. It was a compliment. "Where are we?" Clara asked, her teeth chattering. "Coyote Canyon, Spirit Ground. Hatcher's men won't follow us in here. They're superstitious." Silas set about making a camp, with an efficiency that mesmerized Clara. Within minutes, he had a small, smokeless fire burning under a rock overhang. He laid out a buffalo robe and motioned for her to sit. "Get those wet clothes off," he ordered, turning his back to her to tend the horses. Clara froze. I cannot." Silas sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. He turned back, his expression unreadable. "Miss O'Malley, look at me." She looked. "I have lived with the Apache. I have seen women give birth. I have seen them die. And I have seen them bathe in the river. Your modesty is of no concern to me. Hypothermia is. If you stay in that wet dress, you will die of fever before we reach the New Mexico border. Now, take it off and wrap yourself in the blanket. I will not look." There was an authority in his voice that brooked no argument. Trembling, Clara unbuttoned her sodden dress, peeling the layers of wet fabric from her skin. She felt exposed, vulnerable, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She quickly wrapped the heavy buffalo robe around her naked body. I am ready," she whispered. Silas turned around. He took her wet clothes and hung them near the fire to dry. Then he sat across from her, taking out a strip of dried venison. He cut a piece and handed it to her. "Eat." As Clara chewed the tough meat, she watched him. In the firelight, he looked less like a cowboy and more like the warrior they whispered about. He had taken off his duster. His shirt was unbuttoned at the top, revealing a leather necklace with a strange turquoise stone and an eagle feather. "Why do they call you Wolf?" she asked softly. Silas looked at the fire. "The Apache gave me the name Shaz Dijiji. It means black bear. But the white men, they call me Wolf because I hunt alone." "You speak of the Apache as if you are one of them," Clara said. "I am neither," Silas said, his voice tinged with a bitterness that seemed as old as the canyon. "To the Apache, I am a White Eyes. To the whites, I am a savage. I belong nowhere." He looked up, locking eyes with her. "Until I got your mother's letter." "Why did you do it?" Clara asked. $500 is a lot, but you risked your life." "Your mother saved me once," Silas revealed. "Years ago. I was shot, bleeding out in your father's barn. Tobias wanted to turn me in for the bounty. Your mother hid me, sewed me up, fed me soup until I could ride. I owed her a life." He leaned forward, the firelight dancing in his intense eyes. "And I don't leave debts unpaid." Clara felt a strange heat rise in her cheeks, unrelated to the fire. For the first time in her life, she wasn't looking at a man who wanted to own her. She was looking at a man who had risked everything just to keep a promise. "Get some sleep, Clara," he said, using her name for the first time. "Tomorrow, we ride for the high mesa. We have to cross the Apache lands to get to Santa Fe. It is dangerous." "Will they kill us?" "They might try," Silas said calmly, checking his revolver. But I know the old ways, and I know the rituals. If we encounter the tribe, you must do exactly as I say. We may have to pretend to be something we are not." "What do you mean?" Silas looked at her, his gaze lingering on her face, illuminated by the glowing embers. "To pass through the sacred land safely, a man and a woman must be bound, not by a preacher, but by the spirits." Clara's breath hitched. "Bound? It's an old law. A mate cannot be harmed. If we meet them, you will have to pretend to be my mate. My permanent mate." Clara pulled the buffalo robe tighter. The thought of being this man's mate, even pretend, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Sleep," he commanded again, leaning back against his saddle and pulling his hat over his eyes. But neither of them slept well that night. The air between them was charged with an electric tension, a silent awareness of the other's breathing, waiting for the dawn and the dangers it would bring. By noon, on the second day, the sun was a hammer beating against the anvil of the desert. The rain had vanished, leaving behind a humidity that made the air thick and hard to breathe. Clara rode with her head down. Her skin chafed raw against the saddle leather. She was no longer the pristine girl in the parlor. Her face was smeared with dust, her hair was a tangled golden mess, and her hands were blistered, but she hadn't complained, not once. Silas watched her from beneath the brim of his hat. He had expected her to break by now. He had expected tears, begging, or fainting. Instead, she rode with a grim determination that reminded him of the pioneer women who had crossed the plains in wagons. There was steel in her spine. "Hold up," Silas whispered, raising a gloved hand. He didn't pull the reins. His stallion, a beast named Shadow, stopped on command. Silas tilted his head, listening to the wind whistling through the scrub brush. "What is it?" Clara rasped, her throat dry. "Iron on stone," Silas said softly. "Shod horses, 3 of them. Close." Clara's eyes widened. "Hatcher? His scouts. They're tracking the mud prints before the sun bakes them hard." Silas dismounted fluidly, pulling his Winchester from its scabbard. He moved to Clara's horse and grabbed the bridle. "Get down. Take the horses into that cut in the rock. Stay there. Do not make a sound, even if I scream." "Silas!" "Go!" he hissed. Clara scrambled down and pulled the horses into the narrow fissure of red rock. She pressed her back against the warm stone, her hand over the mare's nose to keep her quiet. She heard the rhythm of approaching hooves. Clop, clop, clop. "Well, looky here," a voice sneered. It was barely 20 feet away. Clara recognized the voice. Caleb Thorne, Hatcher's foreman, a man who enjoyed pain. "Found fresh horse apple. They're close, boys." "I bet the girl is crying for her daddy," another voice laughed. "Mr. Hatcher said we can roughen her up a bit before we bring her back," Thorne said. "Just don't mark the face." Clara clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob of terror. Crack. The sound of the Winchester was deafening in the canyon. Clara flinched as if she'd been hit. "Damn it! Where is he?" Thorne screamed. Crack thump. A body hit the dirt. "He's in the rocks! Flank him!" Gunfire erupted. Bullets pinged off the sandstone, sending sharp shards of rock flying. Clara crouched lower, trembling. She could hear Silas moving. He was a ghost, shifting positions after every shot. Bang. Then silence. Then the sound of a struggle. Grunts. The dull thud of a fist hitting flesh. The wet sound of a knife. Then total silence. 5 minutes passed. A lizard skittered over Clara's boot. She didn't breathe. "Clara!" She jumped. Silas was standing at the entrance of the fissure. He was breathing hard. There was a smear of fresh blood on his cheek, and his knuckles were split. He looked primal, terrifying. Are they? They won't be following us, Silas said grimly. He holstered his revolver. But the gunshots will carry. Sound travels 10 miles in this heat. The rest of the posse will be on us by sundown. We have to move, now. They rode harder than before. The terrain changed, rising up into the jagged teeth of the Dragoon Mountains. This was Cochise's stronghold. The air grew cooler, smelling of pine and sage. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood orange, Silas abruptly stopped his horse. He sat frozen, staring at a ridge about 200 yards ahead. Don't move, he commanded, his voice barely a breath. Why? Look up. 11 o'clock. The ridge. Clara squinted. At first, she saw only rocks. Then the rocks moved. A line of mounted warriors appeared on the crest. They were silent, painted in the colors of war, black and yellow. They held repeating rifles, likely stolen from the U.S. cavalry. They weren't moving. They were watching. Apaches, Clara whispered. Chiricahua, Silas corrected. A raiding party, likely returning to the Sierra Madre. Will we fight them? There are 12 of them. I have 6 bullets left, Silas said calmly. Fighting is death. One of the warriors, a man wearing a red bandana and a vest made of bone beads, raised his rifle and let out a shrill, ululating cry. He kicked his horse into a gallop, charging down the slope toward them. The others followed, a thundering avalanche of muscle and fury. Silas! Clara screamed. Stay on your horse! Silas shouted. He didn't raise his gun. Instead, he raised both hands high in the air, open-palmed. He shouted something in a guttural, sharp language that sounded like stones grinding together. The lead warrior pulled his horse up so sharply it reared, its hooves pawing the air just inches from Silas's face. Dust choked the air. The warrior leveled his rifle at Silas's chest. He had a hard face, weathered like old leather, with eyes that burned with hatred. He barked a question at Silas. Silas answered, his voice steady, his eyes locked with the warrior's. He gestured to himself, then to the sky, then to Clara. The warrior looked at Clara. His gaze was invasive, stripping her bare. He sneered and spat on the ground near Silas's boot. He spoke again, pointing his rifle at Clara. Silas stiffened. He moved his horse slightly, blocking the line of fire between the warrior and Clara. He spoke again, louder this time, his tone carrying a warning. The warrior laughed, a cold, humorless sound. He signaled to the others. Before Clara could react, rough hands grabbed her bridle. What are they doing? She cried. We are going with them, Silas said, not looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the leader. Do not fight them, Clara. Do not look them in the eye. Show submission. Our lives depend on it. Who is he? That is Nalande, Silas said. In English, it means, he who walks with ghosts. He is a war chief, and he hates white men more than he loves breath. They were taken to a temporary camp, high in a box canyon, hidden from the world. It was a place of stark beauty, with a waterfall cascading into a pool of turquoise water. But to Clara, it looked like a prison. The warriors dragged Silas from his horse. They didn't tie him, but they surrounded him. They took his weapons, his Winchester, his pearl-handled Colts, his Bowie knife. Clara was pulled down and shoved toward a fire where 3 women were scraping hides. They looked at her with curiosity and disdain, touching her blonde hair and pulling at the fabric of her ruined dress. Night fell heavy and fast. The camp came alive with the sound of drums. A large fire was built in the center of the clearing. Nalinde stood by the fire, addressing the group. He pointed at Silas, then at Clara. The other warriors murmured, some laughing, others gripping their knives. Silas walked into the light. He looked stripped down, vulnerable without his duster and weapons, yet he stood taller than any man there. He spoke to the chief. Suddenly, Nalinde turned and walked toward Clara. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the fire. Clara stumbled, terror seizing her throat. "Silas!" she gasped. Silas stepped forward, but two warriors blocked his path with crossed spears. "Wait," Silas said in English, his voice cutting through the noise. He switched to Apache, speaking rapidly. Nalinde stopped. He looked at Silas, then at Clara. He pulled a knife from his belt. He didn't cut Clara. Instead, he cut a lock of her golden hair. He held it up to the firelight, letting it drift into the flames where it sizzled and vanished. He said something to Silas, a challenge. Silas nodded. The warriors stepped back. Nalinde gestured for Clara to stand next to Silas. "What is happening?" Clara whispered, her body shaking uncontrollably. "I told them you are not a captive," Silas murmured, not moving his lips. "I told them you are my mate, my soul-bound. And Nalinde says words are wind. He says if you are truly my mate, the spirits must recognize the bond. If they do not, he takes you as his fourth wife, and I die by the anthill." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "The anthill? A slow death. Don't think about it." Silas turned to her, taking her cold hands in his. "Clara, listen to me. They're going to perform the Gotal, a bonding ritual. Usually, it takes days. Tonight, it will be a trial. What do I do? Follow my lead. Do not hesitate. If you pull away from me, even for a second, they will see it as a lie. You have to convince them that you want me, that you belong to me." An old woman emerged from a wickiup. Her face was a map of wrinkles, her eyes milky with cataracts. She carried a clay bowl filled with a steaming, pungent liquid and a bundle of burning sage. She circled them, wafting the smoke over their heads, chanting in a low, rhythmic drone. The smoke smelled of earth and magic. It made Clara's head spin slightly. The woman stopped in front of Silas. She dipped a finger into the bowl and painted a streak of dark liquid across his forehead, then down his chest, over his heart. Then she turned to Clara. She painted the same mark on Clara's forehead, and then, shockingly, she reached out and ripped the top button of Clara's bodice. Clara gasped, instinctively trying to cover herself. "Don't," Silas commanded softly. "Let her." The old woman painted the mark on the skin above Clara's heart. The liquid was warm and tingled against her skin. The woman handed the bowl to Silas. He drank from it, his eyes never leaving Clara's. He handed the bowl to her. "Drink," he said. "All of it." Clara took the bowl. The liquid was bitter, tasting of roots and ash. She choked it down, fighting the urge to gag. As she finished, a warmth spread through her belly, radiating out to her limbs. The fear began to recede, replaced by a strange, floating sensation. Nalinde stepped forward. He barked a command. "He says the bodies must speak," Silas translated, his voice rough. "What?" "We must kiss, Clara. Not a peck. A claim." The circle of warriors tightened. The drums beat faster, mimicking the rhythm of a heart in panic or passion. Silas stepped closer. He towered over her. In the firelight, the scar on his face looked stark, dangerous, but his eyes were blue pools of regret and intensity. "Forgive me," he whispered. He didn't wait for her permission. He couldn't. Silas's hands came up to cup her face. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. Then he lowered his head and captured her mouth. Clara expected it to be rough, a performance for the audience. But it wasn't. His lips were firm but searching. He tasted of the bitter tea and tobacco. For a moment, Clara stood frozen, her arms at her sides. If you pull away, we die. The thought pierced the haze of the drug. Clara made a choice. She didn't just endure it, she met it. She reached up, her fingers tangling in the long, dark hair at the nape of his neck. She pressed her body against his. The warmth in her belly flared into a heat she had never known. She opened her mouth to him, a silent invitation. A low growl vibrated in Silas's chest. His arms went around her waist, pulling her flush against him, lifting her slightly off the ground. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate, real. It wasn't about the Apache anymore. It was about two lost souls colliding in the dark. The world fell away. There was no bow hatcher, no Nalande, only the fire, the drums, and the taste of this man who was supposed to be a savage, but kissed like a drowning man finding air. When Silas finally pulled back, they were both breathless. His pupils were blown wide. He looked at her not as a burden, but as if he had just discovered fire. The camp was silent. The drums had stopped. Nalande looked at them. He looked at the mark on Clara's chest, flushed with the heat of the moment. The chief nodded once, a curt, sharp motion. "It is done," Silas whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "They believe us." "Silas," Clara breathed, her voice trembling. "Hush," he said, stepping back, but keeping a possessive hand on her arm. "It is not over. The ritual has a second part. We must share a blanket tonight, in the open, under the stars." Clara looked up at the vast expanse of the Milky Way, stretching endlessly above the canyon walls. "Together? If we sleep apart, the bond is broken," Silas said, "and the knives come out." He led her away from the main fire to a smaller spot near the edge of the cliff. He laid out the buffalo robe. As Clara lay down, looking at the stars, she realized the terrifying truth. The performance was over, but the feeling in her chest remained. The shy virgin from Bisbee was gone. Something wilder was taking her place. And the man lying down beside her, pulling her back against his chest to keep her warm, was no longer just her savior. He was her fate. But in the darkness of the canyon, just beyond the light of the fires, a coyote howled. And far in the distance, echoing off the canyon walls, came the faint, distinct sound of a bugle. U.S. cavalry. Silas stiffened against her back. "Damn," he whispered. "What is it?" "The army," Silas said. "If they attack the camp, Nalande will kill us before the first soldier dismounts. He'll think we led them here." The twist had arrived. They had survived the outlaw and the savage, only to be threatened by the law itself. The sound of the bugle didn't just echo. It shattered the fragile piece of the canyon like a hammer striking glass. Silas was on his feet in a second, his hand instinctively going for the gun belt that wasn't there. The Apache camp erupted into instant chaos. Warriors scrambled from their wickiups, grabbing rifles and bows. Women gathered children, rushing toward the caves at the back of the canyon wall. "Up, Clara! Now!" Silas roared, pulling her from the buffalo robe. Before they could run, a shadow fell over them. Nalande stood there, his face twisted into a mask of absolute fury. He held a heavy war club in one hand and Silas's confiscated Winchester in the other. "Traitor!" the chief screamed in Apache, swinging the rifle barrel toward Silas's head. Silas ducked, the steel barrel whistling inches above his skull. I did not lead them here, Nalande. Think, if I brought them, why am I sleeping unarmed in your camp? White men speak with forked tongues. Nalande raised the club. Crack, thoom. A cannon shell exploded against the canyon wall 50 feet above them, showering the camp in rock and dust. The U.S. cavalry had brought a mountain howitzer. The explosion knocked Nalande off balance. Seizing the moment, Silas lunged. He didn't strike the chief. He tackled him, shoving him behind a large boulder, just as a volley of carbine fire raked the ground where they had been standing. My woman! Silas shouted over the roar of battle, pointing to Clara, who was cowering near the fire. Give me my gun, or we all die. Nalande looked at the chaos. Blue-coated soldiers were pouring over the ridge, firing indiscriminately. He looked at Silas, seeing the desperation and the lack of fear. The Apache code respected courage above all else. With a snarl, Nalande threw the Winchester to Silas. Fight, Black Bear. If you live, we speak. If you die well. Silas caught the rifle, checked the action, and spun toward Clara. Move! To the waterfall. He grabbed her hand, and they sprinted through the nightmare. The camp was a slaughterhouse. Smoke from the black powder obscured the sun, turning the dawn into a gray hell. Bullets buzzed like angry hornets. Silas! Clara screamed as a trooper on a bay horse cut off their path, raising a saber. Silas didn't break stride. He fired from the hip. Bang! The trooper flew backward out of the saddle. Silas caught the horse's reins. Get up! He threw Clara onto the terrified animal. Ride for the upper trail. I won't leave you, she cried, her face streaked with soot and tears. You have to. Hatcher is with them. He's here for you. As if summoned by his name, a voice boomed out over the gunfire. There! The girl on the horse. Don't shoot the girl! Silas spun around. Emerging from the smoke like a demon was Bo Hatcher. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was dressed in a fine suit covered in dust, riding a massive gray gelding. He was flanked by 3 hired guns, men who didn't fight for the flag, but for gold. Hatcher pointed a gloved finger at Silas. But kill the half-breed. $5,000 to the man who brings me his head. The 3 mercenaries spurred their horses toward Silas. Silas slapped the rump of Clara's horse. Go! The horse bolted up the narrow, rocky trail toward the waterfall. Silas turned to face the charging riders. He worked the lever of the Winchester with terrifying speed. Click-clack, bang, click-clack, bang. 2 riders fell. The third, a bearded giant, collided with Silas, his horse knocking the rifle from Silas's hands. Silas hit the dirt hard, rolling as the horse's hooves stomped the earth inches from his chest. The mercenary jumped down, drawing a massive Bowie knife. Silas scrambled up, drawing his own knife, the one Nalande had returned to him. They clashed in the dust, steel grinding against steel. The mercenary was strong, but Silas was fighting with the desperation of a man protecting his heart. He parried a thrust, stepped inside the man's guard, and drove a knee into his gut, followed by a pommel strike to the temple. The man crumbled. Silas grabbed the mercenary's revolver and looked up toward the trail. His blood ran cold. Clara hadn't escaped. Hatcher had cut her off. High up on the ledge near the waterfall, Hatcher had cornered Clara's horse. He had hold of the bridle and was dragging her off the saddle. No! Silas roared. He began to run, scrambling up the steep, treacherous rocks toward the ledge. His lungs burned. His side bled from a graze, but he felt nothing but a singular, consuming need to kill Bo Hatcher. Clara kicked and screamed, her nails raking across Hatcher's face. "You little witch," Hatcher growled, backhanding her. The blow sent her reeling against the rock wall. "I bought you. You are mine." He grabbed her by the hair, forcing her to her knees. Below them, the battle between the Apache and the cavalry raged. But up here, it was just the three of them. Silas crested the ridge, chest heaving, the revolver in his hand leveled at Hatcher. "Let her go, Bo," Silas said, his voice deadly quiet. Hatcher spun around, using Clara as a human shield. He pressed the barrel of his own pistol against Clara's temple. "Drop it, Kincaid," Hatcher shouted. "Drop it, or I paint this rock with her brains." Silas froze. His eyes locked with Clara's. She was terrified, yes. Her lip was bleeding. Her dress was torn. But beneath the fear, Silas saw something else. He saw the fire that had ignited during the ritual. He saw the woman who had ridden through a storm and looked a war chief in the eye. "You can't have her, Hatcher," Silas said, lowering his gun slowly. "She isn't property. She's a free woman." "She's a commodity," Hatcher spat, "and I always collect my debts. Now kick the gun over the edge." Silas hesitated. If he dropped the gun, Hatcher would kill him. If he didn't, Hatcher might kill Clara. "Do it!" Hatcher cocked the hammer. Silas slowly tossed the revolver over the cliff. It clattered down the rocks, lost in the noise of the battle below. Hatcher laughed, a cruel, victorious sound. "You really are a savage fool. Did you think this was a fairy tale? Did you think love saves the day?" He shifted his aim from Clara to Silas. "Goodbye, Wolf." Time seemed to slow down. Silas braced himself for the bullet. But he had underestimated Clara O'Malley. In the split second that Hatcher shifted his focus to Silas, Clara didn't scream. She reached into her boot. She pulled out the small, dull paring knife she had stolen from her father's kitchen, the one Silas had laughed at 3 days ago. With a primal cry, she drove the blade deep into Hatcher's thigh. Hatcher roared in shock and pain, his gun firing wildly into the air as his leg buckled. "Run, Silas!" Clara screamed, scrambling away. Silas didn't run. He launched himself at Hatcher like a mountain lion. They hit the ground, rolling toward the edge of the precipice. Hatcher was heavy and strong, fueled by adrenaline and rage. He clawed at Silas's eyes, punching, biting. They grappled on the edge, dust and loose stones tumbling into the abyss below. Hatcher managed to get his hands around Silas's throat, squeezing with crushing force. "Die. You breed," Hatcher wheezed, his face purple. Silas's vision began to spot with black. He couldn't breathe. He flailed for a grip, for a weapon, for anything. Then a shadow fell over them. Click. Hatcher froze. He looked up. Clara stood over them. She was holding Hatcher's fallen pistol. She was holding it with 2 hands, her stance wide, just as she had seen Silas hold his. She wasn't shaking. "Get off him," she said. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It was iron. "You won't shoot," Hatcher sneered, though his grip on Silas loosened. "You're a church girl. You can't kill a man." "I'm not a church girl anymore," Clara said. "I'm the wolf's mate." She fired. The bullet struck Hatcher in the shoulder, spinning him off Silas. He howled, clutching the wound, teetering on the edge of the cliff. He looked at Clara with wide, unbelieving eyes. "Clara!" he gasped. Silas sat up, coughing, rubbing his bruised throat. He looked at Hatcher, then at Clara. He stood up slowly, walking over to her. He gently placed his hand over hers on the gun, lowering it. "He's done," Silas said softly. Hatcher scrambled backward, trying to get away, but his wounded leg gave out, He slipped. His hands clawed desperately at the smooth rock, but there was nothing to hold. With a final scream of rage, Bo Hatcher fell backward, tumbling down into the smoke and chaos of the canyon floor below. Silas didn't watch him fall. He only looked at Clara. She dropped the gun and collapsed against him. Silas wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her neck, holding her so tight it almost hurt. They stood there on the ledge, covered in blood and dust, while the battle below began to die down. The silence that followed Bo Hatcher's fall was heavier than the gunfire that had preceded it. The dust in the canyon began to settle, drifting down like dry snow over the bodies of mercenaries and soldiers alike. Silas didn't move immediately. He sat on the edge of the precipice, his chest heaving, his hand instinctively going to his throat, where Hatcher's fingers had left deep, bruising, violent marks. He looked at Clara. She was still holding the smoking revolver, her knuckles white, her eyes wide and unblinking. She looked like a statue carved from shock and granite. "Clara," Silas croaked, his voice ruined. She blinked, the spell breaking. The gun clattered from her hand, hitting the stone with a metallic ring. She didn't faint. She dropped to her knees and crawled to him, her hands frantically checking his chest, his face, the grazing wound on his side. "He's gone," she whispered, a tremble finally entering her voice. "I killed him." "You saved us," Silas corrected, catching her wrists to stop her frantic searching. "You did what a warrior does. You survived." Before they could say more, the sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel announced the arrival of the law. Captain Miller, a grizzled veteran of the Indian Wars, with a mustache stained by tobacco, stepped onto the ledge. He was flanked by 4 troopers, their carbines at the ready. Miller looked at the edge where Hatcher had fallen, then at Silas, and finally at the fierce, disheveled woman kneeling beside the bounty hunter. "Hatcher?" Miller asked, his voice gruff. "Dead," Silas said, slowly standing up and placing himself between the soldiers and Clara. "He tried to kill the girl. I stopped him." Miller eyed the revolver on the ground. He was a smart man. He knew a lie when he heard one, but he also knew justice when he saw it. Hatcher had been a plague on the territory for a decade. Miller kicked the gun over the edge, watching it vanish. "Right," Miller grunted. "You stopped him. The Army thanks you for your assistance, Mr. Kincaid. Though I suggest we get you 2 to the surgeon wagon before you bleed out on my boots." The journey out of the Dragoon Mountains was a blur of pain and exhaustion. They traveled with the cavalry column, a slow procession of wounded men and tired horses. Silas rode at the back, his injuries bandaged but throbbing with every step of the horse. Clara rode beside him, refusing the offer to ride in the supply wagon. For 3 days they barely spoke. It wasn't the silence of anger. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of 2 people who know their time is running out. Every mile they rode toward civilization was a mile away from the world they had built in the canyon. The ritual, the fire, the bond. It all felt like a fever dream that was slowly dissipating in the cold light of reality. When the adobe structures of Santa Fe finally came into view, nestled against the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, Silas felt a leaden weight settle in his gut. This was where he had to leave her. This was the deal. They arrived at the home of Clara's aunt, Margaret O'Malley, a stern but kind spinster who lived in a large house with a wrought iron gate and a garden full of carefully tended roses. It was a house of order, rules, and safety. Everything the canyon was not. When Aunt Margaret saw Clara, Dirty, torn, wearing men's boots, she wept openly, rushing to the gate to embrace her niece. Silas hung back, holding the reins of the horses. He looked at his own dusty duster, his scarred hands, the mud on his boots. He looked like a wolf standing on the threshold of a church. He didn't belong here. "Thank you, sir," Aunt Margaret said, looking at Silas with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "I have the money my sister promised. I can get it from the safe." "Keep it," Silas said, his voice low. "She's safe. That's the payment." He didn't look at Clara. He couldn't. If he looked at her, he knew he wouldn't be able to leave. He tipped his hat, turned Shadow around, and rode toward the livery stable in town without a backward glance. A week passed. Santa Fe was bustling with the autumn trade. The air smelled of piñon smoke and roasting chilies. For Clara, the safety of her aunt's house felt like a prison. She was scrubbed clean, her hair brushed and pinned into a proper chignon. She wore dresses of stiff silk and crinoline that made it hard to breathe. The local doctor had treated her cuts, and the lawyer had assured her that with Hatcher dead, the deed to her father's ranch was legally hers. She was an heiress now, a woman of means. But every night, she woke up gasping for air, reaching for a warmth that wasn't there. She missed the smell of the campfire. She missed the weight of the stars. She missed him. She heard the rumors in town. The wolf was still in Santa Fe, drinking heavily at the saloon on the edge of town, looking for a bounty job that would take him far west, maybe to California or Oregon. He was running. On the evening of the 7th day, Clara sat on the front porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of purple and gold, the exact colors of the Apache war paint. The iron gate creaked. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She stood up, her hands gripping the wooden railing. Silas walked up the path. He had tried to make himself presentable. He had bathed, shaved the rough stubble, and bought a clean shirt. But he still wore the gun belt. He still walked with the silent, predatory grace of a hunter. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at her. He twisted his hat in his hands, a nervous gesture she had never seen from him before. "I'm riding out in the morning," Silas said. The words hung in the air like smoke. "Got a lead on a bank robber up in Colorado. It pays well." "Colorado," Clara repeated, her voice steady. "That's far." "Best if I go far, Clara. Best for everyone." He looked down at his boots. I wanted to see you one last time, to make sure you were all right. You look proper. You look like you belong here." "Do I?" Clara asked. She walked down the steps, the silk of her dress rustling like dry leaves. She stopped on the bottom step, so her eyes were level with his. "Because I feel like I'm wearing a costume, Silas. I feel like I'm suffocating." Silas' jaw tightened. "That's just the shock wearing off. You'll get used to it. You have a ranch now. Money. You can find a good man. A lawyer, maybe. Or a merchant. Someone who doesn't sleep with a Winchester under his pillow." "Is that what you think I want?" Clara's voice rose, cracking with emotion. "You think after everything we saw, after everything we did, I can just sit in a parlor and drink tea?" "It's the life you were born for," Silas snapped, the pain breaking through his stoic mask. He stepped closer, his blue eyes blazing. "Look at me, Clara. I am a killer. I have Apache blood on my hands and white blood on my conscience. I have nothing to give you but hard ground and cold nights. I am trying to save you from a life of misery." "You saved my life in the canyon," Clara said fiercely, stepping into his space, defying the distance he tried to keep. But if you leave me here, in this cage, you are killing the woman I became. You are killing the part of me that is yours. Silas froze. Clara. Remember the ritual, Silas? She whispered, reaching out to touch the turquoise stone that still hung around his neck. Nalandi said the spirits don't lie. When you drank from the cup, and I drank, when you kissed me, was that a lie? Tell me it was a lie, and I will let you walk away. Silas looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had given her the courage to pull the trigger on the cliff. He saw the white lily, yes, but she wasn't fragile anymore. She was a desert flower, one that could survive the drought and the storm. He tried to say the words. He tried to tell her it was a lie, but his throat closed up. He couldn't do it. He had never broken a promise in his life, and the promise his heart had made by that fire was the truest thing he had ever known. It wasn't a lie, he rasped, his resistance shattering. God help me, Clara. It was the only true thing in my whole wretched life. Then don't leave me, she said, tears spilling over her lashes. Take me to Colorado. Take me to the hard ground and the cold nights. I don't want a soft life, Silas. I want a real one. With you. Silas let out a shuddering breath, a sound like a heavy door finally opening. He dropped his hat. He reached out, his rough hands cupping her face with a reverence that made her knees weak. You are a stubborn woman, Clara O'Malley, he murmured, a small, crooked smile touching his lips for the first time in weeks. I learned from the best, she countered. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. If you come with me, there's no turning back. No parsons, no churches, just the sky and the trail. I don't need a parson, Clara whispered. I already had my wedding, under the stars. Silas kissed her then. It wasn't the desperate, drug-fueled kiss of the ritual. It was a slow, deliberate claiming. It was a promise sealed not in blood, but in hope. It tasted of the future. The aunt was scandalized, of course. She said Clara was throwing her life away for a vagabond. But Clara signed the deed to the ranch over to a trusted manager, bought a sturdy roan mare, and packed her saddlebags. They rode out of Santa Fe at dawn, just as the sun was cresting the peaks. They didn't look back at the town. They looked north, toward the high country. History tells many lies, but the legends of the West tend to hold a kernel of truth. In the years that followed, the story of the wolf and the white lily became a campfire favorite. Cowboys in lonely line shacks would tell of a couple who rode the high passes of the Rockies. They said the man could track a ghost over solid rock, and the woman could shoot the wings off a fly at 50 paces. They never settled in a town. They built a cabin in a hidden valley in the San Juan Mountains, a place where the air was thin and clean, and the stars hung so low you could brush them with your fingertips. They say they had children, wild, happy things, who ran barefoot in the snow and spoke Apache as well as English. And they say that Silas Kincaid, the man who thought he was born to die alone, died an old man in a warm bed, holding the hand of the only woman who ever saw the man beneath the savage. Under the forever sky, they were free. And that was all that mattered. What a journey. From a terrified girl in a parlor to a warrior woman saving the man she loves on a cliff's edge. Silas and Clara proved that love isn't just about soft words. Sometimes it's about fighting for each other when the whole world is against you. I want to know what you think. Did Clara make the right choice leaving civilization behind? Or should she have taken the ranch and the money? Let me know in the comments below. If this story made your heart race, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow, so I can bring you more epic sagas. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to hear next week's story. A mystery set in the fog-covered streets of Victorian London. Thanks for watching, and keep the legend alive.